I don't even know where to begin, except to say that every time I think back on those years, it feels like my life belonged to someone else. Like I'm remembering a movie I once saw rather than something I actually lived. But the emotions, the weight pressing down on my chest even now, remind me it was all too real. And it all started, as these stories usually do, with a woman who seemed perfect at first. Her name was Claire. The first time I met her, she had this energy about her that pulled me in before I even realized I was moving closer. She wasn't loud. She wasn't the center of attention, but her presence was like gravity. You couldn't ignore it. We were introduced by mutual friends at a small gathering, and though the room buzzed with chatter and laughter, I couldn't take my eyes off her. Dark hair falling over her shoulders, those sharp, curious eyes that seemed to strip away whatever mask I put on. She asked questions no one else bothered to ask, and she actually listened when I answered. At the time, I was convinced I had finally stumbled onto someone who saw me. Not just the version of myself I showed to the world, but the man beneath, the flaws, the insecurities, the unspoken things. Claire had a way of making me feel exposed and safe all at once. That night, we ended up sitting in a corner for hours, talking about everything from books to regrets to dreams we'd never admitted to anyone else. I walked her home, and though nothing happened beyond a lingering glance and a quiet good night, I went back to my apartment buzzing with a strange mix of excitement and peace. In the months that followed, our connection deepened. We weren't perfect, no one ever is, but with her, life seemed fuller, brighter. Even the mundane felt worth something. Grocery shopping turned into playful debates about brands. Rainy Sundays became excuses to stay in bed until noon, wrapped around each other, whispering about nothing and everything. I'd had relationships before, but this one felt like it could last, like it might actually be the thing people spend their whole lives chasing. But here's the thing I've learned. It's often in the moments you think you've finally found stability that the ground beneath you starts to crack. The signs were subtle at first, almost invisible if you weren't looking. A hesitation when I asked about her day. A text left unanswered until hours later, though I knew she always kept her phone closed. The excuses, small, believable, harmless. I lost track of time. I didn't hear it buzz. Work ran late. And for a while, I let myself believe them, because the alternative was too uncomfortable. Still, little doubts started creeping in, like drops of water finding their way into stone. I remember one night in particular, we were supposed to meet for dinner. She canceled last minute, saying she wasn't feeling well. Concerned, I decided to drop by her place with soup and tea, just to check in. When I got there, her lights were off, and no one answered the door. Later that night, she texted me back with a casual apology, saying she had taken something for the headache and fallen asleep. It was a reasonable explanation. Too reasonable, maybe. I didn't push, not then. Love has a way of making you blind, or maybe just willingly ignorant. I told myself everyone deserves privacy, that she had her own life outside of me, and that trust meant not questioning every little detail. And for a while, I managed to quiet the suspicions that scratched at the back of my mind. But deep down, something in me knew the story wasn't adding up. I could feel it in the way her touch sometimes seemed distracted, in the way her eyes occasionally drifted when I spoke, as if she was half somewhere else. And yet, despite the unease, I held on tighter. I convinced myself that whatever storm was brewing, I could weather it if I just loved her enough. Looking back, I see how naive I was. The truth was already there, waiting for me in the shadows I refused to face. And the night that truth finally stepped into the light would be the night everything changed. At the time, though, I was still living in that fragile illusion of happiness, still clinging to the version of us I wanted to believe in. I didn't realize how close I was to losing it all, or how much it would cost me when the cracks finally split open. The weeks that followed felt like living inside a storm with no shelter. On the surface, everything between us seemed normal. We had dinners, we laughed at stupid TV shows, she kissed me goodnight. But underneath, I felt the cracks widening. Trust, once fractured, doesn't heal like skin. It leaves scar tissue, and every time you move, you feel the pull of it. I started noticing the little things. Her phone, always flipped face down on the table. The way she smiled at texts but never mentioned who they were from. Late nights at work that didn't add up when I checked her schedule. My gut screamed at me, but my heart begged me not to dig too deep. Because what if I found out something I couldn't forgive? I told myself I was being paranoid, that the late nights and secretive behavior were just me projecting my fears onto her. But paranoia is like hunger. It doesn't go away just because you ignore it. It gnaws at you until you do something about it. One night I couldn't take it anymore. She had fallen asleep, her phone buzzing softly on the nightstand. I told myself I just wanted peace of mind, that if I saw nothing I could finally breathe again. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone, entered the code I'd once known by heart and prayed it hadn't changed. It hadn't. That almost hurt worse. The messages were there, plain as day. Words between her and someone saved only as harmless at first glance jokes, little stories from their day. But then I scrolled further. Compliments. Inside jokes I'd never heard. Then late at night the tone shifted. Flirty, suggestive. The kind of messages you don't send unless there's something more. My stomach turned to ice. I set the phone down like it was burning my hand. Stared at the ceiling while she slept peacefully beside me, completely unaware of the storm raging inside me. Do I confront her? Do I walk away? Or do I pretend I never saw it just to keep the life we built intact? The next morning I said nothing. Cowardice, maybe. Or maybe I wasn't ready to face the truth. I went to work, sat through meaningless meetings, laughed at coworkers' jokes, all while carrying a secret that made my chest feel like it was caving in. Days turned into weeks. The messages between her and Dee grew bolder, though she never mentioned him once. She still kissed me, still held my hand, still made plans for our future. That duality was what hurt the most, how easily she could play both roles. My partner in the light, someone else's in the dark. One Friday night we went out with friends. She was radiant, charming, the center of attention as always. I watched her laugh, her eyes sparkling, and for a moment I let myself forget. But then her phone lit up on the table. A message from Dee, just his name, no preview. Her face paled when she saw it just for a second before she tucked the phone away and forced another laugh. That was the moment I knew, not just suspected but knew, and the knowledge felt like swallowing glass. I excused myself, stepped outside into the cool night air and tried to breathe. My hands shook as I lit a cigarette, a habit I'd quit years ago, one I only returned to in moments of unbearable stress. My mind raced, replaying every sign, every excuse, every lie I'd let slide. When she came outside, her smile was a mask I could see right through. She slipped her arm through mine, kissed my cheek, and asked if I was okay. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized how much distance there already was between us, even as she stood inches away. I didn't confront her that night, but something shifted in me. I wasn't the same man who had blindly trusted, who had ignored his instincts just to keep the peace. I was someone else now, someone harder. The betrayal wasn't just in the messages, or in the secrecy. It was in the fact that she let me believe we were fine while building a separate world behind my back. And I couldn't decide what was worse, the pain of knowing, or the torture of not knowing what else lay beneath the surface. By the time we got home, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to sit quietly in the dark anymore. I was going to shine a light on every shadow she tried to hide. And when I did, I wasn't sure either of us would survive it. I wish I could say that night with Clara was the breaking point, the moment when everything clicked into place, and I finally decided to stop chasing after a ghost. But life doesn't work that cleanly. Sometimes the truth doesn't land like a lightning strike. It drips slowly, drop by drop, wearing you down until one day you realize you're soaked and shivering, too tired to fight it anymore. After Clara left, I sat there in the dark, staring at the untouched drink in my hand, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the muffled traffic outside. Her words wouldn't leave me. She's hiding something. People don't twist their lives like that unless there's a reason. I tried to tell myself Clara was wrong, that she was just bitter or jealous. But the more I replayed the nights, the conversations, the half-truths Anna fed me, the harder it became to ignore the gaps between what she said and what I saw. The next morning, Anna woke up before me. I smelled coffee brewing, heard the soft clinking of cups. When I came out, she was standing by the stove, hair messy but perfect in that careless way of hers, like she belonged in some glossy magazine spread for effortless mornings. She smiled when she saw me, set a cup down, kissed me softly. And for a moment I almost forgot everything. That's the hold she had on me. But the cracks kept widening. She'd take calls late at night, step into the hallway, lower her voice until it was a murmur I couldn't catch. She started getting dressed up more often, claiming she was going out with coworkers for team drinks. Once, I offered to drive her just to be kind, but she insisted on taking a cab, brushing off the idea with a nervous laugh. "You don't need to babysit me," she said, her eyes flicking away from mine. I began noticing little details, receipts stuffed into her purse, the faint trace of cologne that wasn't mine lingering on her scarf, the way she sometimes avoided looking me straight in the eyes when I asked about her night. I wanted to confront her, to rip the bandage off and force the truth into the open, but every time I tried, the words turned to ash in my throat. What if I was wrong? What if Clara had poisoned my mind with suspicion, and I destroyed the only good thing I had left? One night, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I told Anna I had a late shift and waited until she left, dressed in that black dress she knew drove me insane. I followed her, staying just far enough behind. My heart was hammering the entire time, my palms slick on the steering wheel. I hated myself for it, hated the paranoia that had turned me into this shadow of a man sneaking through the night. She didn't go to the bar she mentioned. Instead, she went to a quiet restaurant across town, one I'd never even heard her mention. I parked across the street, stomach twisting into knots. And then I saw him, a man, tall, broad-shouldered, confident. He walked straight to her table, kissed her cheek like he'd done it 100 times before, and she smiled in a way that cut me to pieces. I don't remember driving home. I don't even remember getting out of the car. What I do remember is the silence when I walked back into the apartment, the suffocating emptiness of a space that suddenly didn't feel like mine. I sat there until she returned hours later, laughing softly to herself as she fumbled with the keys. She froze when she saw me sitting in the dark. "Why are you up?" she asked, her voice catching just enough to betray her surprise. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the truth in her face, demand answers, demand respect. But instead I just stared at her, the words burning a hole in my chest, and whispered, "Who is he?" Her face drained of color. For a long second she didn't move, didn't speak. Then she forced a smile that looked brittle, fake. "What are you talking about?" she said, but her voice shook. That was all I needed. That hesitation, that crack in her armor, it was confirmation enough. I stood, brushing past her without another word, locking myself in the bedroom. My hands trembled as I leaned against the door, her muffled voice on the other side begging me to believe her, telling me I was imagining things. But the image of that man kissing her cheek played over and over in my mind, searing itself into me like a brand. That night I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to her cry softly in the living room. And for the first time since meeting Anna, I wasn't sure if I loved her anymore. Or maybe I did, and that was the problem. Because love had turned me into a fool, and fools bleed the longest when the knife finally slips. There's a strange moment when betrayal stops being a sharp wound and turns into something duller, heavier, like carrying a rock around in your chest. That's what it became for me. I wasn't waking up in cold sweats anymore, but I'd catch myself staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning, wondering how I had been so blind. But here's the thing, I didn't stay passive. I wasn't going to be the man who licked his wounds quietly. If Sarah had built a secret life, I would dismantle it piece by piece. At least that's what I told myself. One evening after work, I drove past the cafe where she and Mr. Unknown used to meet. I parked across the street and waited. For nearly an hour, I sat there like some washed-up detective from an old noir movie, watching strangers sip lattes, couples laugh, waiters bustle in and out. No Sarah. No man. Still, the obsession grew claws inside me. A few nights later, I followed her car after she left yoga. I know it sounds pathetic, almost laughable, but when your life feels like a lie, logic is a casualty. I tailed her carefully, headlights off whenever I could, heart thundering like a drumline in my ribs. She didn't head toward the gym. She drove to the outskirts of town, to this quiet, half-forgotten diner. And sure enough, he was there, the same guy from the mall, the same shadow who'd been haunting the edges of my imagination. They didn't kiss. They didn't hold hands. But the intimacy was written in the way she leaned across the booth, her eyes wide and alive, the way he laughed with his head thrown back like he owned the moment. I sat in my car, fingers gripping the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked, and for the first time I realized it wasn't about lust. This wasn't just a fling. No, this was worse. She looked at him like she used to look at me. I wanted to burst in, flip the table, scream at both of them, but I didn't. I stayed put, watching, shaking, silently boiling in my own madness. Eventually, they parted ways, no kiss, not even a touch. She drove home, I followed at a distance, and when I finally collapsed into bed that night, I felt hollowed out. The next morning, Sarah acted as if nothing was wrong. She hummed while making coffee, kissed me lightly on the cheek, and joked about the weather. That's when I understood the true cruelty of betrayal. It isn't always loud. Sometimes it's wrapped in domestic quiet, a smile hiding a knife. Days blurred together. My sanity frayed. I started noticing small changes in her, the way she guarded her phone, the faint cologne I didn't own lingering on her scarf, the occasional slip when she mentioned a funny story but couldn't quite say who she was with. And yet, whenever I thought about confronting her, my chest tightened and fear won. What if she left me? What if she admitted everything and walked out the door? I wanted the truth, but I wasn't ready to live without her. And then, as if the universe wanted to shove me off the edge, I got a message. A number I didn't recognize. Just one sentence. You deserve to know what she's been hiding. Attached was a picture. Sarah, sitting at that diner, laughing with him. The angle suggested someone else had been watching too, someone close enough to capture their secret. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just me anymore. Someone else knew. Someone was pulling me into a game I didn't understand. And that's when it hit me. Sarah wasn't just betraying me. She was entangled in something bigger, something darker, and I had no idea what storm was about to break over both of us. I never thought silence could be this loud. After everything came to light, after every mask fell, the world around me didn't just quiet, it screamed in a way I couldn't ignore. You'd think the truth would give closure, or at least a sense of control, but instead, it hollowed me out, leaving me with more questions than answers. And the cruelest part, some of those questions had no answers at all. I moved out of that apartment within a week. I couldn't stay there. Every corner reeked of her shadow, every drawer and shelf whispered secrets I no longer wanted to uncover. I packed what was mine, left what was hers, and walked away. No notes, no farewell, just a locked door behind me and the sound of my own footsteps echoing like gunshots down the hallway. But leaving the place didn't mean leaving the memories. They followed me everywhere, stitched into the lining of my mind. Nights were the worst. I'd lie down, and suddenly I was back in that bedroom, hearing her laugh faintly in the distance, not knowing if it was with me or with him. I replayed moments on a loop. Her smile, her promises, the way she touched my face and said I was the only one. And then, as if my brain wanted to torture me further, I'd see the scene on the screen again, hear the moans that weren't meant for me, feel the sting of betrayal as fresh as the first night I discovered it. People around me had their opinions. Move on. She wasn't worth it. You dodged a bullet. Easy advice to give when it's not your heart bleeding out on the floor. I nodded, agreed, even pretended sometimes that I was healing. But the truth is, betrayal doesn't just cut, it reshapes you. It rewrites the way you trust, the way you love, even the way you look at yourself. I started digging into myself, almost obsessively, as if I could find the part of me that made her do it. Was I not enough? Did I miss signs? Was there something broken in me that invited betrayal? It was a dangerous spiral, one I knew logically wasn't fair, but emotions aren't logical. They gnaw, they demand, they accuse. And in the middle of all of it, I realized that maybe the biggest lie she told wasn't the affair itself, but how much of us was ever real. Time, though, it has this stubborn way of moving, even when you're standing still. Weeks became months, and little by little, the fire in my chest burned out. Not in a clean way, more like a dying ember refusing to fade. There were still nights I woke up drenched in sweat, still mornings when I reached across the bed instinctively, only to find nothing but sheets. But I also found moments, brief, fragile moments of peace. One of those moments hit me on an ordinary Tuesday. I was sitting in a diner, coffee in hand, staring out the window as rain smudged the city into a blur. And for the first time in months, I realized I wasn't thinking about her. Not her laugh, not her lies, not her betrayal. Just silence, just myself. And it didn't feel empty, it felt freeing. That's when it hit me. Betrayal doesn't define me. Her choices, her secrets, her downfall, they're hers to carry, not mine. What defines me is how I rise after, how I learn, how I choose not to let the weight of her sins chain me down. Do I forgive her? No. Forgiveness is too big, too sacred to be handed out like charity. But I no longer crave revenge, no longer ache for explanations that will never come. I let go not for her but for me. Because the truth is, carrying that kind of poison only corrodes the one who drinks it. Looking back now, I see the whole story differently. Not as the end of love, but as the end of an illusion. She was a chapter, not the book. A wound, not the death of me. And while scars never truly fade, they remind us of battles survived, not of the enemies who caused them. So here I stand, flawed but unbroken, scarred but still breathing. I tell this story not because it's tragic, but because it's real. Because sometimes the most painful endings are the ones that shape us into people strong enough to face whatever comes next. And maybe, just maybe, the right kind of love, the kind that doesn't lie, doesn't shatter, doesn't fade, still waits somewhere down the line. But if not, I'll still keep walking. Because I've already survived the worst kind of storm, and now I know I can survive anything.